One day, the Smith family next door was enjoying a barbecue in their yard, taking advantage of a rare day off. That day, their son John was away on a business trip. Oblivious, children merrily romped across the spacious yard. As I gazed at the Smiths with a forlorn look, Kate, the wife, noticed my stare and said, "Would you and yours like to join us?" Though Kate reached out with concern, I could only offer a wry smile, tangled in complex feelings. Beside me, observing the Smiths, my daughter-in-law Sarah remarked, "Looks like the picture-perfect family." Her words didn't seem to come from the heart, but carried a tinge of sarcasm. Hearing this, I too felt incredibly uncomfortable. Knowing the truth made Sarah's every remark unbearably irritating to me. With anger and disdain in my voice towards Sarah, who mocked Kate and her children, I said, "Sure, but it's your actions that will bring unhappiness to that family."
Eh? What do you mean by that, Mary?
Stunned, Sarah looked at me as I deliberately avoided her gaze.
Everything will become clear when John returns from his trip tomorrow. Look forward to it.
I answered with a scoff, and Sarah, whether she understood my true intentions or not, understood, nodded with a smile. My name is Mary, 56 years old. Just an ordinary homemaker like any other. Having lost my husband a few years ago, I now live with my eldest son and his wife. John, my eldest, has always been diligent and excelled in both academics and sports, but compared to his peers, he's been somewhat awkward with social interactions, especially in love. During his student days, while many of his friends went out on dates over the weekend, John always prioritized his studies. As a mother, it worried me how uncomfortable he was around women. Once he started working, his opportunities to go out drinking with colleagues surged. Perhaps it was for the best because he eventually met a popular woman at work, and they started dating. The woman, Sarah, whom he brought home, made me internally shout with joy for my son. I never had the courage to ask how a man like John, who struggled with love, ended up with a beauty like Sarah, but I imagined she was drawn to his genuine nature. That was my hopeful wish as a mother. Sarah was indeed beautiful, and at their wedding, relatives and John's friends joked with a hint of jealousy. "She's too good for John." As a mother, I felt a sense of pride. Upon deciding to get married, Sarah quit her job to support her husband as a homemaker. John had told her, "If you still want to work, you don't have to quit." But Sarah resigned without hesitation. After getting married, they lived in a cheap apartment near our home for a while, but after my husband passed away, John suggested they move in with me, worried about my well-being. I feigned independence.
"I'll be fine on my own for a while. Besides, I don't want to be a burden to you too."
But truthfully, I was overjoyed. I expected Sarah to be reluctant, but she surprisingly supported the idea. Praising John in my heart, I thought he had married a wonderful person. However, my only concern was their lack of children. Whenever my peers shared stories about their grandchildren, I couldn't help feeling anxious. Once, I subtly asked John about it, and he lightly responded, "Sarah's not ready yet. Plus, these things depend on luck and timing." So, I decided not to pressure them and leave the matter to the couple. 6 months ago, a young family moved into the house right next to mine. Watching their elementary school-aged boy energetically play in the large yard made my heart leap. The house, previously occupied by an elderly couple and later left vacant after the husband died and the wife moved to a facility, seemed too spacious to remain unused. I looked forward to beginning a wonderful neighborhood relationship with the new family. As a moving truck was followed by a small car, a woman stepped out of the passenger seat and introduced herself. "We're the Smiths, moving in next door. We have a child, so it might get noisy, but we hope for your understanding." With a housewarming gift in hand, I instantly took a liking to Kate as she greeted me. I had heard that the younger generation these days finds neighborhood interactions bothersome and hardly ever greets their new neighbors properly, but Kate was different. She made sure to greet us, and more importantly, her smile was wonderful. Kate was worried that the noise from her children playing could cause neighborhood disputes, but to me, the sound of children was more like a source of energy.
You don't need to worry about that. Kids are supposed to be noisy, it's like their job. Besides, hearing the lively voices of children brightens my spirit too.
After I said that, it seemed to put Kate at ease, and she started visiting our house more frequently for various reasons. However, around the same time, I began to notice a gradual change in Sarah's behavior. Initially, when we started living together, Sarah was actively helping with the household chores, but lately, she's been finding excuses to avoid them. It's understandable if she has errands to run, but increasingly, she spends her time in the bedroom just fiddling with her mobile phone. Nonetheless, I hesitated to complain too much from my side, fearing it might lead to a mother-in-law and daughter-in-law conflict. Besides, Sarah married John, not me. I convinced myself to overlook Sarah's behavior for the sake of peace. But I would soon learn that Sarah's cold attitude was not only towards me, but also towards her husband, John. During family dinners, when John would share stories from work, Sarah would get up and, despite there still being food left, she would clear up and return to the bedroom. On days off, when John would suggest going for a drive, "It's too much hassle, go by yourself," she would respond with an annoyed look. Concerned by Sarah's indifferent attitude, I asked John,
"Is everything okay between you two lately? Have you had a fight or something?"
But John could only tilt his head, saying, "I can't think of anything, but Sarah's been acting strange recently." Not knowing the cause made both John and I feel unsettled. Sarah's behavior became increasingly odd, not just towards us but also towards our neighbors, the Smiths. Initially, she had welcomed the new neighbors with open arms, happy to make new friends, but her attitude gradually changed. Especially towards Kate and her son Ben, she began to throw nasty comments. On a school holiday, as Ben was playing in the garden pool, Sarah stood by the window.
"I wonder what kind of education they're giving, making such a racket in a quiet residential area,"
and complained in a raised voice. I was a bit surprised to hear this nearby.
"But I think it's good for kids to be loud and lively. It's a sign of health. Besides, the number of children around here has been decreasing lately, so it's actually nice."
Sarah then looked at me with an unmistakably disdainful face and said,
"That's exactly what spoiling children is, Mary. You have to discipline them strictly from a young age, or it'll be too late when they grow up."
She said it with such a frown that it felt like I was being scolded myself. She also repeated her harsh comments towards Ben's mother, Kate. One day, as Kate was driving off for shopping,
"You're still young, you should be walking to the shop. It's people like you who contribute to environmental issues."
Sarah criticized from a superior standpoint, as if she never used a car herself. "Sarah, don't you think you're being too harsh on Kate and Ben? Maybe you should be a bit kinder? After all, they're our neighbors and we'll be living alongside them for a long time." I gently cautioned her, but Sarah glared at me.
"I'm just stating what's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. I absolutely cannot accept such an unreasonable person as our neighbor,"
she retorted strongly. Yet, I began to feel uneasy as Sarah, who was strict with Kate and Ben, somehow acted charmingly towards their husband, Tom. Sarah, who had shown no interest in gardening before, suddenly took on the task of watering the garden in the evenings, coinciding with Tom's return from work. They would chat and laugh together in front of the house. Sarah's expression at those times was notably different from the one she showed to me or John. Almost like that of a woman in love.
Sarah, it's fine to be friendly with the neighbors, but being overly familiar with the husband next door is concerning. There are neighborhood eyes, and misunderstandings could arise.
Worried, I said this to Sarah, but she responded irritably.
What I do or how I'm perceived is none of your business, Mary.
She locked herself in the room and wouldn't show her face again. And there was another thing that worried me. Lately, I've been feeling like our expenses have been exceeding our income. Aside from the inheritance left by my husband, our only income is what John earns from his job. I try not to interfere with financial matters because I don't want to burden John, but we've been receiving more notices for unpaid utility bills. Working for a large company, it doesn't make sense for John to fall short on bills if he's working normally. But the bills were indeed falling behind. I wondered if John was having financial troubles he couldn't tell me about, but nothing in his usual demeanor suggested that. Curious, I decided to subtly ask if he was having financial difficulties. John chuckled and said,
I've left the finances to Sarah, so there's no need to worry. Plus, I've recently been promoted to manager, so my salary should have increased.
My worries gradually shifted towards Sarah. She seemed utterly unaware of my suspicions, but I made sure to keep an eye on her as much as possible. What I noticed was that Sarah was always fiddling with her mobile phone. Even during meals or when John was talking to her, she'd be on her phone. Then, I witnessed something shocking. While John was out for a business dinner, Sarah, who had been looking at her phone as usual, suddenly stood up and dashed outside. Having had my suspicions about Sarah for a while, I followed her discreetly. Sarah hurried into the Smith's house, who she usually complained about. Kate and Ben were supposed to be out preparing for Ben's upcoming school trip that day. Unaware that I was watching, Sarah knocked on the Smith's door. I wondered why she didn't use the intercom, and then Tom appeared from inside the house. The two of them locked eyes and suddenly embraced and kissed.
What in the world?
I was so surprised that I covered my mouth. They were in that kind of relationship. All of Sarah's previous behaviors flashed back in my mind after discovering her betrayal. Her cold attitude towards me and John started after the Smiths moved in next door. If Sarah's beloved wasn't John but Tom next door, everything made sense. Her harsh words towards Kate and Ben were because they were an eyesore to her. She didn't use the intercom to avoid automatic recording. Everything about Sarah's actions pointed to one truth, and I was overwhelmed with sadness. We had been deceived by her all along. And it wasn't just us. Kate and Ben likely didn't know this truth either. Sarah and Tom were betraying everyone around them. My body trembled with anger and disappointment, but I desperately held back from confronting her. What would it accomplish to confront her now? She would surely say,
"Me and Tom in that kind of relationship? Where's your proof?"
I had no proof. In my shock, I didn't even have time to take a photo, so if she claimed it was my misunderstanding, that would be the end of it. But I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I just saw. It would surely bring misery not only to me but to John, Kate, and their child as well. I resolved to discipline Sarah and Tom. Using the savings I had put aside for my old age, I hired a detective agency a friend recommended. The investigation revealed that their relationship had developed far beyond what I had imagined. Going through the evidence sent by the detective agency, I couldn't stop my anger and sadness, constantly sighing.
I was completely fooled by Sarah. I tolerated her for John's sake, but even that has its limits.
One day, the Smith family was enjoying a barbecue in their yard, taking advantage of a rare day off. That day, John was away on a business trip. Unknowing, Ben was happily romping around the spacious yard. As I gazed at the Smith family with a forlorn look, Kate noticed my stare. "Would you like to join us, Mary?" Kate reached out with concern, but I could only muster a wry smile amidst my complex feelings. Next to me, watching the Smith family, Sarah said.
"Looks like the picture-perfect family."
Her words didn't seem heartfelt, but rather contained a hint of sarcasm. Hearing this beside her, I felt an immense discomfort. Knowing the truth only made any of Sarah's comments all the more unbearable to me. Filled with anger and resentment towards Sarah for mocking Kate and Ben, I said,
"Yes, but it's your actions that will bring unhappiness to that family." "Eh? What do you mean by that, Mary?"
Stunned, Sarah looked at me as I intentionally averted my gaze. "Everything will become clear when John returns from his trip tomorrow. Just wait and see." I replied with a scoff, and Sarah, whether she understood my true intentions or not,
"Understood,"
nodded with a smile. The next day, when John returned from his trip, I called both of them to the living room. Unaware of anything, Sarah was casually looking at her mobile phone screen. She must still be secretly communicating with Tom. Without saying anything, her somewhat elated expression, which John had never seen before, was enough for me to understand. John, tired from his long journey, frowned.
"If you have something to say, please make it quick. I'm exhausted. I just want to take a shower and go to bed early today."
John, now a manager, was swamped with work every day and needed to rest when he could to be ready for the next day. I knew this well, but the matter at hand couldn't wait. I had to confront them with a truth that would significantly affect John's life going forward.
"Whether this gets resolved quickly depends on Sarah's response,"
I said meaningfully. Sarah looked up from her mobile phone with a puzzled face.
"Mary, what exactly do you mean by that?"
Instead of answering her question, I placed a large envelope from the detective agency on the table.
"A detective agency? What's this about?"
John looked back and forth between Sarah and me, confused. Meanwhile, Sarah's face turned ashen, unable to utter a word.
"Sarah, what's wrong? You seem unwell."
John noticed and leaned in. "You look pale. If you're feeling sick, don't push yourself. Rest in your room for a bit." His voice gentle as he rubbed Sarah's back. But prepared to be disliked, I said,
"John is truly kind. I'm proud to have raised such a fine human being as a mother. But there's absolutely no need to be kind to Sarah." "What do you mean? That's not like you, Mom."
I fixed my gaze on Sarah. Sarah tried to look away, her face turning even paler, clearly drained of blood.
Seeing the words detective agency, it seems Sarah has something on her mind, doesn't it?
Sarah didn't try to respond, which only deepened the suspicion, given her usual readiness to retort. John, sensing something was amiss, grabbed Sarah's shoulders.
"What's going on? Do you understand what Mom is saying?"
And shook her vigorously. Seeing no point in remaining silent, I decided to reveal the contents of the envelope. Out came dozens of photos and a lengthy investigation report. John's expression gradually changed as he went through each photo. Normally mild-mannered, John's brows furrowed and his eyes reddened. He glared at Sarah, who sat silently beside him.
"What's all this about?"
And muttered. I calmly told my son, who was just discovering his wife's infidelity.
"Your wife has been secretly meeting with Tom next door while you were away for work. And it's not just that. She made excuses to go out multiple times to meet Tom and even went to hotels with him. The coldness in her attitude towards you was because of this."
Sarah, having been exposed to the truth by John, let out a shrill scream.
"It's all over. I can't stand this boring life anymore, suffocating every single day, absolutely."
Sarah's voice echoed not just in our house but throughout the neighborhood. I couldn't help but sigh and hold my head in disbelief at Sarah's outburst, revealing her true nature. A few minutes later, our doorbell rang, so I left the two in the living room and went to answer the door. The Smith couple had rushed over, alarmed by Sarah's screaming. Then John approached with heavy footsteps.
"This is actually good timing,"
he said, though his voice was calm, it was laced with clear anger.
"John, you look furious. What happened?"
"Let's just say I have something to discuss with you."
"Come in. I would have called you over eventually, so this saves me the trouble." "What's going on here?"
asked Kate, clueless. Feeling sorry for Kate, I gently rubbed her shoulder. "I'm sorry, Kate. This might be hard for you, but it's something very important." Kate nodded firmly, her eyes filled with determination, as if she had guessed what was about to unfold. Contrastingly, Tom, sensing something was amiss, was flustered, while Kate, pulling Tom's arm, entered our house. In the living room, Sarah was slumped over, holding her head. Seeing this, Tom turned on his heel.
"Actually, I just remembered I have an errand to run. I'll be leaving now."
John stopped him.
"Please wait. I'll make some coffee. Have a drink before you go."
"No, thank you." Ignoring Tom's reluctance, John and I forcibly seated him on the guest sofa.
"Sarah, stop sulking there and come explain yourself,"
I demanded, as if scolding her. Sarah walked towards us with the stiff movements of a lifeless robot. John, Sarah, the Smith couple, and I now faced each other across the table. The photos and reports sent from the detective agency. When shown to Tom and Kate, Tom stood up abruptly and began to deeply apologize.
"I'm so sorry. It was just a moment of folly."
Surprisingly, Kate remained calm, contrary to my expectations. "I thought so. You've been acting jittery lately, and I knew something was off." Ignoring Tom's profound apology, Sarah spoke up. "How ridiculous. There's no need to apologize to these people." Then Sarah brazenly began to tell the whole truth. Sarah's relationship with Tom dated back to before she met John. She had wanted to marry Tom, but at that time, Tom was already married and Kate was pregnant. To Tom, his affair with Sarah was nothing more than a fling. Feeling lonely and indifferent, Sarah married John on a whim. Sarah says this without seeming apologetic. "It didn't matter who it was. You seemed like a good, serious guy with a big house and presumably some money, so I married you." Though Sarah initially gave up on Tom, the longer they were apart, the harder it was for her to suppress her feelings. She resumed her affair with Tom. "I don't care if we can't marry. Just move close so I can see you whenever. But if you don't, I'll tell Kate everything." Tom, wanting to continue the affair yet not lose his family, reluctantly agreed to Sarah's demands.
"As the child is growing, let's live in a larger house with a yard,"
he cunningly convinced the unsuspecting Kate. It was also revealed that, in exchange for Tom moving next door, Sarah had been giving him large sums of money every month. "No wonder the dishes at dinner have been getting fewer recently." John laughed past his anger. Sarah blamed her infidelity on the fact that John was too serious and boring, but it was clear that was just an excuse. Meanwhile, Tom was desperately apologizing to Kate, trying to win her forgiveness, but Kate didn't listen and went back to her own house. Without turning back, Kate shouted at Tom as he tried to follow her.
"Don't ever come back!"
and left. In the end, both Sarah and Tom were not allowed back into their homes and ended up staying in a business hotel that night. Years of infidelity led to the collapse of their marriages. Kate, having run out of patience with Tom, chose to divorce him and demanded a hefty settlement and child support. John, too, sought a divorce and a large settlement, including the money Sarah had secretly given to Tom. Just as I predicted, Sarah was the cause of the neighbors' unhappiness. Kate, choosing to live with Ben alone, was very supportive during John and Sarah's divorce trial, even lending evidence. Thanks to this, a strong relationship continued between our families. Sarah and Tom, abandoned by their spouses, ended up marrying each other as they had wished. Tom still had lingering feelings for Kate, but what was lost could not be regained. Sarah, left without a breadwinner, blamed everything on Tom and insisted on marrying him. Tom had no choice but to start a second life with Sarah reluctantly.
We'll be happier than John and Kate. We'll show them how happy we are.
Sarah, ignoring Tom's protests, deliberately rented a house near us to live. However, burdened by the hefty settlements and ongoing child support, Sarah and Tom couldn't bear the financial strain and begged us,
"Please, lower the amount,"
in front of our house. Of course, we had no intention of accepting such a request. Unable to bear the sight of Kate and Ben living happily without any troubles, Sarah and Tom's relationship became notorious in the neighborhood for constant quarrels. Eventually, running out of savings and despite Tom's strong opposition, Sarah moved far away due to the lack of money. As expected, they quickly fell into poverty and were chased by debts, as I heard through the grapevine. Years later, Ben, now a high school student, suddenly said,
"It's about time you two got married,"
urging John and Kate towards remarriage with a mature tone. They had always gotten along, but Ben's words gave them the push they needed. And so, John and Kate finally became husband and wife. I cherished Ben like my own grandson, living happier days than ever before. A happiness genuine and true.